Yeah, so I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So there's one hadith and one verse of Quran which will form we call it the unwan, the heading of the session today. The verse of Quran is from Surah Mujadala, which is the chapter of the woman who pleads, 58th chapter of the Quran, verse number 11. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, God will raise those who have believed amongst you and those who were given knowledge by degrees. And the hadith is, verily the believing jurists are the fortresses of Islam, like the encircling wall that surrounds a city. And this is from al-Kafi, but the detailed references are all in the write-up. So the shield protected. For the last several sessions, we stood on the ramparts and we looked outward. We examined geopolitics of waiting, the forces that threaten the community during the greater occultation, and the divine counter-strategy that mobilizes believers not merely to survive, but to resist, to build, to prepare the ground for the return of the Imam. May God hasten his return and may our souls be his ransom. But a shield, no matter how strong, only defends. It does not build. It does not teach. It does not preserve the words of a prophet across 14 centuries of exile, persecution, and empire. Tonight we turn inward. We turn from the shield to what the shield protects, the living, breathing architecture of guidance that the scholars of Ahlul Bayt constructed, stone upon stone, generation after generation, through the longest night in the history of any community on earth. We begin a new chapter. And the question that launches it is deceptively simple. When the Imam disappeared, who kept the light on? So a question, why this series? Why the door, the tawqi' opened? But why this series? We can recall, in session 52, we stood with Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samari, the fourth and final deputy, as he delivered the last tawqi', which is the last written communication from the Imam of the age, may our souls be his ransom, and may God hasten his return, 6 days before the deputy's own death in 329 AH. The letter sealed the minor occultation. The door of specific deputyship, what we call a niyaba al-Khassa, was closed. But another door, far wider, far more demanding, was opened. And the key to that door was embedded in a single sentence delivered not in the final tawqi', but through the second deputy, Muhammad bin Uthman, in a communication that we examined in session 50. And it said, as for the newly occurring events, refer regarding them to the narrators of our traditions, for surely they are my proof upon you, and I am the proof of God upon them. The references, as always, are in the write-up. We should think about this sentence very carefully. We should read it again, we should hear it again. As for the newly occurring events, refer regarding them to the narrators of our tradition, for surely they are my proof upon you, and I am the proof of God upon them. This is not a suggestion, it is not advice, it is a constitutional charter. The Imam, the divinely appointed leader of the Muslim community, the Muslim Ummah, delegated his authority in the arena of newly occurring events to a specific class of people, the narrators of the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. And he declared them his hujjah, his proof upon the community, while simultaneously declaring himself the proof of God upon them. This creates a chain, from God to the Imam, from the Imam to the scholar, from the scholar to the community. This chain is not theoretical, it is not aspirational, it is operational. And the question this series asks is, who were these scholars? What did they build? How did a persecuted, scattered community without a visible leader create the most enduring religious educational institute in human history? The answer is a story that spans more than 1,000 years, and we call it the architecture of guidance. Now, a quick word on the nature of what follows. Before we lay the first stone, it is important to be clear about the scope and purpose of what lies ahead. This series, The Architecture of Guidance, which is actually a sub-series of The Lantern of the Path and Mahdawiyyah, will unfold in 3 movements. The first movement, this is what we begin tonight. And over the coming 16 or so sessions, we will trace the builders of the Shia scholarly tradition from the classroom of Imam al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, through the crisis of occultation, through the great compilers and theologians and martyrs, through the founding of the Hawza, through the Mongol catastrophe and the Safavid Renaissance, and the modern struggles up to our own age. This is the story of the Hawza, the seminary, the garden, the protected enclosure of knowledge. The second movement, after these 16 or so sessions, will be a series of bridging sessions in which we examine the institution of Marja'iyyah in great depth. Not merely what a marja is, but the full scope of his authority. The concept of the Hakim Shar, the jurist as a judge and governor. The historical reality of the that Maraja maintained their own enforcement mechanisms to uphold the Sharia within the territories of various empires, and how this institution evolved from a scholarly advisory role into a comprehensive system of communal governance. We will understand what the Marja'iyyah is before we can understand what it became. The third movement, God willing, in the third sub-series, we will address Wilayat al-Faqih, the governance of the jurist. And that discussion will not begin where most assume that it will begin, with Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul. But it will begin where it must begin, with the wilayah of God himself, flowing downward through the Prophet, the Imams, and finally to the Faqih. That is a journey unto itself, and it requires the foundation that we're about to build. Tonight, we begin laying this foundation. We introduced 3 concepts, the Hawza, the Marja'iyyah, and Wilayat al-Faqih, not just as dry definitions, but as living realities that shape the daily life of every Shia Muslim on earth, in the past, now, and going forward, until the return of our Master, may our souls be his ransom. So please give me a salawat and we move to point 1, the Hawza, the protected garden. So what is the Hawza? The word Hawza comes from the Arabic root hawaza, meaning to possess, to gather, to enclose and to protect. A Hawza, in its simplest definition, is an enclosure, a protected space. But what is being protected? Knowledge. Not any knowledge. The knowledge that flows from the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family and righteous companions, and the traditions of the 12 Imams. The Hawza is the institutional structure through which this knowledge has been preserved, taught, debated, refined, and transmitted across more than a millennia. And here, immediately, a crucial distinction must be drawn. In the Western educational model, the model most of us are familiar with, the institution confers authority upon the individual. For example, a degree from Oxford means something because Oxford means something. The institution is the primary and the individual secondary. In the Hawza, this relationship is reversed. The individual scholar is the institution. The seminary is not a building with a brand. It is a circle of students gathered around a teacher. When the teacher moves, the seminary moves. When the teacher dies, that particular circle dissolves and new circles form around his greatest students. This is why the great madaris or madrasas of the Islamic world were named after their founding scholars, not the reverse. For example, you have the madrasa of Sheikh al-Tusi, you have the circle of Sheikh al-Mufid, you have the seminary of Allama Hilli, and so on. The authority did not flow from a logo or a campus. It flowed from the knowledge, piety, and ijaza, which is permission or authorization to transmit, of the individual alim, the individual scholar. And this has a profound consequence. It means that the story of the Hawza is not the story of buildings and institutions in the abstract. Rather, it is the story of human beings, of their courage, their sacrifice, their spiritual states, their intellectual genius, and often their blood. The Hawza was not built in a way the university is built, with a founding charter, a board of governors, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Hawza was grown, the way trees grow from a seed, through soil and storm, watered sometimes by rain and sometimes by the tears of scholars, sometimes by the blood of scholars who buried their libraries and fled from burning cities, carrying nothing but the knowledge in their hearts. Now, this is not a human invention. The Quran itself commands this. In Quran, Surah At-Tawbah, the chapter of the repentance, 9th chapter of the Quran, verse 122, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And it is not for the believers to go forth all at once, for there should separate from every division of them a group to obtain understanding in the religion and warn their people when they return to them, that they might be cautious." This verse is, in the tradition of Ahl al-Bayt, the founding charter of the Hawza. And notice what it commands. Not everyone is to go out and fight. A group, what we call ta'ifa, must remain behind to obtain deep understanding, لِيَتَفَقَّهُ, in the religion. And then they must return to their people and warn them. So there are two obligations in one. The obligation to learn and the obligation to teach. The Hawza is the institutional expression of this verse. A group dedicated to deep understanding so that the community does not walk in blindness. The Imams, peace and blessings be upon them, reinforce this again and again. For example, Imam al-Sadiq has said, "Be an ornament for us and not a disgrace upon us." A reference, of course, to the write-up. This is not a request. Rather, this is a command. And it was understood by the scholars as a mandate to build knowledge, to build institutions, to build a community so excellent that it brings honor to the name of the Ahl al-Bayt. But we have said what the Hawza is in structural terms. We have said that it's an enclosure of knowledge, that the scholar is the institution, that it is rooted in Quran. We have not yet said what makes it alive. And here we must speak from a place deeper than textbooks. The education, the classes, the text, the examinations is a part of the Hawza, an important part certainly, but it is not the heart. If education were all that the Hawza offered, a good university could replace it. A well-funded online program even could replicate its curriculum. A sufficiently motivated individual could study the books alone in his room at home. But he would not become what the Hawza produces. Because the Hawza does not primarily produce scholars. And this is important. It produces human beings. And that difference is everything. What makes the teachers of the Hawza special? Is it their knowledge? If it were merely their knowledge, then any professor who has memorized the same text would suffice. But we know intuitively and experientially that this is not the case. A man can memorize every hadith in, for example, al-Kafi, and remain spiritually dead. A man can master every principle of usul al-Fiqh and still be enslaved to his ego. What makes the great teachers of the Hawza extraordinary is not their knowledge alone. Rather, it is their connection with God. This is actually the same quality that made the Ahl al-Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, magnetic. People were drawn to Imam al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, not primarily because he was a brilliant jurist, though he was, but because the love of God permeated through him and into those who sat in his presence. His knowledge was alive because it flowed from a heart that was connected to its source. And this quality, this spiritual radiance, if you like, does not transmit through a textbook or a video. It transmits through presence, through sitting at the feet of a teacher whose heart is awake, through years, sometimes decades of proximity to a human being who has walked the path of self-purification and emerged on the other side as a mirror reflecting divine light. This is what the Hawza at its best offers, not merely information, but transformation. And this brings us to a delicate but necessary point. There are Hawza-style institutions today in many cities around the world, and they do important work. But there is a reason, a spiritual reason, not merely a historical or logistical one, why the two great Hawzas of the world are in Najaf and Qum, specifically, and nowhere else. It is not merely that these cities have buildings and libraries. It is that these cities have shrines. Najaf is the resting place of Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, the door or the gate to the city of knowledge. It is also the site of Wadi as-Salam, the Valley of Peace, a massive graveyard where numerous prophets are said to rest. Knowledge does not merely happen to be in Najaf. Knowledge gravitates to Najaf because the door to the city of knowledge is there. There is almost a spiritual gravity to the place that cannot be replicated. Qum is built upon resistance and sacrifice. We studied this when we studied Sayyedah Fatima Ma'suma, but briefly, when Sayyedah Fatima Ma'suma, peace and blessings be upon her, the sister of Imam al-Rida, peace and blessings be upon him, was traveling to visit her brother and was attacked by the enemies of Ahl al-Bayt, she was injured and ultimately fell ill and was brought to Qum, where she passed away. She was buried there, and her shrine became the seed from which the entire scholarly and spiritual tradition of Qum grew. It is not incidental that Qum is special. It is special because of her, and because of her position with God. And regarding the relationship between these two centers, there is a tradition from Imam al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, that demands our attention. The reference for it is, of course, in the write-up, but the hadith says, "Soon Kufa will become empty of the believers, and knowledge will leave it like a snake leaves its hole. Then knowledge will appear in a land called Qum. It will become the center of knowledge and virtue, so that there will not remain an unaware person in his religion, not even the woman who stays at home. This will happen close to the time of the reappearance of our Qa'im." Now, this does not mean that Najaf is empty of knowledge, far from it. Najaf remains a towering center of learning, home to some of the greatest Marja'iyyah of our time. But the tradition points to something very specific, that the innovations, the deep philosophical advances, the breakthroughs in spirituality and thought would increasingly emanate from Qum. And when we look at history honestly, we see this unfolding before our very eyes. The transcendent philosophy of Mullah Sadra was taught and revived in the circles of Qum and Isfahan, not Najaf. The mystical heights of Ayatollah Bahjat and Ayatollah Hassanzadeh Amali, to name a couple, these were Qum phenomena. The philosophical depths of Allama Tabataba'i's Al-Mizan in Imam Khomeini's lectures on Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hakam, for example, these flowered in Qum. The political philosophy that produced the Islamic Revolution was incubated in Qum. Najaf's tradition is of a different character, more focused on jurisprudential rigor, on the classical textual sciences, on a certain measured caution. Both these traditions are essential, both are needed. They are two lungs of the same body, but they are not identical. And the student who is drawn to the deeper dimensions of knowledge, spirituality, and civilizational thought will find that Qum offers something that cannot be found elsewhere in the same concentration. And in both Qum and Najaf, what makes the Hawza work is the atmosphere, the fact that knowledge is not confined to the classroom. Rather, it is something that is in the air. It is in the conversations between students walking to and from the shrine. It is in what we call the mubahathat, the open discussions, where students sit in pairs or groups and wrestle with a text, arguing, questioning, challenging each other, sharpening the mind the way iron sharpens iron. It is in the midnight prayers at the shrine, where a student who has spent the day studying, for example, al-Faqih, stands before God and remembers why he is studying at all. And the real purpose? And this is the deepest point. The student who enters the Hawza with the desire to become a mullah, to wear the scholar's garb, to wrap a turban around his head, to be called sheikh, such a person has already failed. And such a person will continue to fail no matter how many texts he masters, because he has mistaken the means for the end. The turban is not the goal. The aba, it is not the goal. The title is not the goal. The goal is to become a human being. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, has said, whoever truly knows himself has indeed come to know his Lord. Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah. References, of course, are in the write-up. Think about this carefully. It doesn't say, whoever memorizes hadith has come to know his Lord. It doesn't say, whoever earns a degree has come to know his Lord. It says, whoever knows himself. And what does it mean to know yourself? It means to strip away the illusions of ego, the convictions that you are important, that you are already learned, that you are better than the man sitting next to you, the illusions of title and status, the belief that a turban somehow makes you holy, that a cloak makes you wise, the illusions of comfort, the assumption that you can attain closeness to God without the pain of confronting your own deficiencies. To know yourself is to look at yourself honestly, ruthlessly, without the cosmetics of self-deception, and see what is actually there. The envy, the pride, the laziness, the fear, the attachments, and then, and only then, to begin the work of building. Because you cannot build on a foundation you have not examined. You cannot construct a palace on a swamp. You must first drain the swamp, and that drainage is the process of tazkiyah, the purification of the soul that the Quran places before the teachings of the book. In Quran, Surah Jum'ah, the chapter of Friday, 62nd chapter of the Quran, verse number 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it is He who has sent among the unlettered a messenger from themselves, reciting to them His verses and purifying them and teaching them the book and wisdom. Now look at the order. Yuzakkihim, purifying them, comes before yu'allimuhumul kitab, teaching them the book. Purification before education. Character before curriculum. Becoming human before becoming a scholar. This is what the Hawza, the real Hawza, the one supervised by the Imam from the unseen, is designed to produce. Not walking libraries, not men in turbans who quote but cannot love. Not jurists whose hearts are harder than the text that they study, but human beings. Whole, purified, humble, courageous human beings who have confronted themselves, conquered themselves, and emerged fit to serve the Imam of the age. Everything else, the classes, the ijazah, the methodology, all of this is scaffolding. The building itself is the human soul. So why does this matter to us, here, now, in this age? First, the Hawza is not a historic relic. It is alive. As we speak, students in Najaf and Qum sit in circles. studying the same texts that were written in the 4th century after Hijrah, using methodologies refined over a millennium, in an unbroken chain of transmission that stretches back to the Imams themselves. The closest parallel in the Western world is the University of Bologna, founded in 1088 of the Common Era, and Oxford, founded around 1096 of the Common Era, came decades after Sheikh al-Tusi established the formal Hawza of Najaf. We are inheritors of the oldest continuously functioning educational tradition in the world. And yet, how many of us know the names of its builders? That is what this series will remedy, God willing. Second, we must be honest about a growing crisis. In many diaspora communities, Hawza has become a brand, a weekend course, a 2-year diploma, a certificate to hang on the wall. There is nothing wrong with Islamic education outside of Qum and Najaf. Indeed, it is desperately needed. But we must not deceive ourselves into believing that a program in London or Toronto or Dearborn or Sydney or wherever can replicate what the great houses produce. The spiritual atmosphere, the proximity to the shrine, the presence of scholars whose hearts are awake, the years of grinding self-confrontation through the mubahathat, these cannot be packaged into a syllabus and shipped overseas. They must be lived. The student who is serious, truly serious, must, at some point, go to the source. Not because the source has a monopoly on information. Information is everywhere. But because transformation requires immersion, much like we discussed in The Joy of Fasting. And immersion requires being in the place where knowledge lives in the air, where the shrine of the Imam or the daughter of the Imam radiates a gravity that pulls the soul towards its purpose. Third, and most importantly, we must examine our own intentions. Every one of us, not only Hawza students but every believer, must ask ourselves the question that the tradition poses with uncomfortable clarity. Am I trying to accumulate knowledge, or am I trying to become a human being? Because the world does not need more people who can quote hadith at dinner parties. It does not need more turbans without substance behind them. It does not need more degrees without transformation. It needs real human beings. Human beings who have wrestled with their egos and won, or at least who are still fighting honestly and sincerely every day. Human beings who have understood that man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah, whoever truly knows himself has indeed come to know his Lord, as we quoted earlier, is not a slogan or a poster. It is a program for life. A program that begins with the terrifying act of looking at yourself as you truly are. And ends, if God wills, with a glimpse of the one who created you. This is the standard the Hawza was built to uphold. This is the standard we must hold to. And this is the standard we must hold ourselves to, whether we have ever set foot in the seminary or not. Please give me a salawat, and we move on to point 2, the Marja'iyyah, the scholar as a compass. So what is a marja'? If the Hawza is the garden in which scholars are cultivated, the Marja'iyyah is the fruit that garden produces. The word marja' means quite literally a point of reference, a place to which one returns. A marja' taqlid is a scholar of such extraordinary learning, piety and competence in Islamic jurisprudence that the ordinary believer, who cannot personally spend decades mastering the intricate sciences of usul al-Fiqh, rijal, tafsir, hadith and many others, can follow the marja's rulings in matters of practical religious law. This is taqlid, emulation, and it is not blind following. It is the rational recognition that specialization is necessary. When you are ill, you consult a doctor, not because you are incapable of reading a medical textbook, but because the doctor has spent years mastering a system of knowledge that you have not. You trust his diagnosis not out of ignorance, but out of informed deference to his expertise. The relationship between the believer and the marja is identical in principle, but it carries an additional weight because the marja does not derive his authority from a university, a government, or even a board of certification. He derives it from the tawqi', the letter of the Imam, where the Imam said, "As for the newly occurring events, refer regarding them to the narrators of our tradition, for surely they are my proof over you, and I am the proof of God over them. They are my proof upon you." The marja stands in the chain, God to the Imam, Imam to the scholar, scholar to the community. His authority is not self-appointed, rather it is delegated from the Imam himself through the scholars who came before, through the chain of what we call ijaza and scholarly transmission. Ijaza being permission to teach, permission to be a marja. And it goes all the way back to the narrators who sat at the feet of the Imams and recorded their words. This is why the Marja'iyyah is not merely an academic institution. It is a sacred trust. So, we will explore the full scope of the Marja'iyyah in the bridging sessions that follow the 16 on the Hawza. But a preview is warranted tonight because without it, the audience may underestimate what the Marja'iyyah actually is. The Marja is not merely a man who answers questions about prayer and fasting and such things. In the classical understanding and in practice throughout much of Islamic history, the Marja functioned as, number one, a jurist, a Faqih, issuing rulings on all matters of Islamic law. Number two, a judge, what we call Hakim Shar', adjudicating disputes between believers. Number three, a custodian of the community's wealth, collecting and distributing khums and zakat and other religious dues. Number four, a guardian of the vulnerable, overseeing the affairs of orphans, widows and the incapacitated. And a protector of the faith, defending the community's doctrinal integrity against deviation. And at various points in history, the Marja maintained enforcement mechanisms, not police in the modern sense, but networks of agents, representatives, and yes, armed protectors who ensured that the Sharia was upheld within the community and that the community was defended when external attacks came, even when the surrounding political authority may have been hostile or indifferent. This was not an aberration, it was the norm. For example, when the Ottomans governed Iraq, the Shia of the south did not look to Istanbul for justice. They looked to Najaf. The Marja was their governor in all but name. This is the institution that we will examine, not in the abstract, but through the lives of the men who built it. Now, every Shia Muslim alive today is connected to this chain, whether they are conscious of it or not. When you open your Risala Amaliyya, your practical laws manual, or you go online to a website of your marja to check a ruling, you are engaging with the Marja'iyyah. When your community or the representative of the marja collects and distributes khums, you are participating in a system that was designed by the Imams and refined by the scholars across 1,000 years. When a single fatwa from Najaf can mobilize hundreds of thousands, as we witnessed in 2014, when Grand Ayatollah Sistani's ruling brought forth the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular mobilization forces as they're known in English, to defend Iraq against the Israeli-manufactured Daesh, also known as ISIS. At this point, you're witnessing the operational power of the Marja'iyyah in real time. To understand this institution is not an academic luxury. It is the duty of the waiter. Because the community that does not understand its own governing structure is a community that can be manipulated, divided, and ultimately led astray. Please give me a loud salawat. We move to point 3, Wilayat al-Faqih, the horizon. So there's a question that would not go away. If a scholar can guide individuals, can the scholar guide a state? If the marja can collect taxes, adjudicate disputes, defend the faith, and protect the vulnerable, is he not already governing? And if he is already governing in substance, should he not govern in form? This question is not modern. It is as old as the occultation itself. The moment the Imam disappeared and the scholars inherited his Marja'iyyah, yani his authority as proof, the question was planted like a seed. It germinated slowly through Shaheed Awal's expansion of the jurist role in the 8th century of Hijrah, which we will cover, through the Usuli victory in the 12th century, through the tobacco revolt in the 13th, until the 14th century, when Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, gave it its fullest articulation. The governance of the faqih or the jurist is not an innovation. It is the logical and necessary conclusion of the Imam's delegation of his authority. If the Sharia was revealed by God to be implemented, and it was, then it cannot be suspended simply because the Imam is in occultation. Someone is duty-bound to implement it. And the most qualified person to implement it is the one who has spent his life mastering it, the faqih. This is wilayat al-Faqih. Now, an important point, what this series will not do and what the future series will. We will not, in these 16 sessions, 16 up to 20 sessions, attempt to fully and wholly unpack wilayat al-Faqih. That discussion deserves and demands its own dedicated treatment. What we will do is trace the intellectual and institutional foundations that made wilayat al-Faqih possible. Because wilayat al-Faqih did not emerge from a vacuum. It emerged from a 1,000-year tradition of scholars who generation after generation expanded the scope of what the faqih could do and should do, from compiling hadith, to debating theology, to founding seminaries, to administering community affairs, to leading political resistance movements, and to finally governing a state. Every scholar we will study in this series, from Sheikh al-Kulaini to Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, is a stone in the road that leads to that destination. And in the future sub-series on wilayat al-Faqih, God willing, we will trace the concept from its true origin, not from Imam Khomeini, but from the wilayah of God himself, flowing through the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, through the 12 Imams, and finally to the Faqih. That is the complete picture. These sessions are a preparation for it. Now, even if someone disagrees with the political implementations of wilayat al-Faqih, and scholarly disagreements on the matter exist and are legitimate, no serious student of the Shi'i tradition can afford to be ignorant of the concept, because it is the culmination of the very tradition that we are studying. To study the Hawza and ignore wilayat al-Faqih is like studying architecture and refusing to discuss the dome. The dome is where the whole structure converges. We are not here to impose a position. We are here to understand deeply, honestly, and from the sources. And when we understand, we can each make informed decisions, as the tradition has always demanded of us. And so here is the map. And this particular session today is more like an introduction to what will come possibly for the next year. Over the coming 16 or so sessions, we will walk through the following eras. We will begin where all things begin, in the classroom of Imam al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, the 6th Imam, who taught 4,000 students and created the intellectual DNA of the entire tradition. And this is where there is a convergence with the work that we've previously done on Imamah. Moving forward, we will meet the founders of the Sunni schools of law, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and trace their own debts to the Imam's teaching. We will then enter the crisis of the occultation and meet the men who saved the tradition from oblivion. Al-Kulaini, who spent 20 years compiling al-Kafi in hostile Baghdad, and Sheikh al-Sadiq, who traveled from Qum to Central Asia to fight the community's doubt about the ghaiba itself. we will witness the intellectual revolution of Sheikh al-Mufid, the man to whom the hidden Imam himself wrote letters, and his students, the brothers Sayyid Murtada and Sayyid Radi, who gave us Nahj al-Balagha. We will stand beside Sheikh al-Tusi as the Seljuks burnt his library in Baghdad, and watch him walk through the ashes to Najaf, where he will establish the Hawza that has now outlasted every empire that tried to destroy it. We will mourn the martyrs of Jabal Amil. Shahid Awwal, who wrote the most enduring legal textbook in Shia history in 7 days from memory while awaiting execution in Damascus, in a prison in Damascus. And Shahid al-Thani, who was beheaded on the road to Hajj and his head sent to the Ottoman Sultan. We will marvel at the Safavid Golden Age, at Sheikh Bahai, who designed the most beautiful square in the world while simultaneously writing poetry and engineering water systems, and at Mullah Sadra, who synthesized the entirety of Islamic philosophy while exiled to a village by conservative clerics who feared his ideas. We will enter the modern struggle, the Akhbari Usuli debate that defined the Marja'iyyah, the tobacco revolt that proved the scholar could mobilize millions, the Ba'athist horror that tried to extinguish the Hawza and produced instead the revolutionary genius of Ayatollah Shahid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. And we will arrive at our own age, at Imam Musa al-Sadr, at Imam Khomeini, at the Resistance, at Ayatollah Sistani, and at the martyred Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, who was taken from this ummah on the 28th of February 2026 by the American Zionist war machine, and whose blood, like the blood of every scholar martyr before him, will only deepen the roots of the tree he spent his life watering. And we will meet his successor, his son, Imam Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, may God protect him, who did not arrive at the helm from a political vacuum, but from the heart of the Hawza itself. For more than 17 years, Sayyid Mujtaba has been teaching Bahth al-Kharij in the Hawza of Qum. For those unfamiliar with this term, it's important to understand what it means. Bahth al-Kharij literally means external research. It is the highest level of study in the Hawza. It is not a classroom in the traditional or ordinary sense. There is no textbook. There is no set curriculum. The senior scholar, typically a mujtahid of the highest rank, presents his own independent research on a given subject, jurisprudence, principles of jurisprudence, and the advanced students listen, question, challenge, and engage in debate. It is where original scholarship is born. It is where the tradition grows. To teach Bahth al-Kharij is to stand at the frontier of Islamic thought and push it forward. Sayyid Mujtaba's sessions were not merely well attended, they were exceptionally well attended, drawing hundreds of advanced Hawza students. And his areas of inquiry went beyond the traditional Hawzawi subjects. Alongside classical jurisprudence, he was pioneering research into the jurisprudence of the knowledge economy, the legal and ethical frameworks for artificial intelligence, and the Islamic position on the challenges of high technology and digital civilization. He was, of course, not alone in this. Scholars such as Ayatollah Jawadi Amali and our own teacher, Ayatollah Mohsen Araki, among others, have been similarly pushing the boundaries of what the Hawza addresses. And this brings us to a misconception that must be shattered tonight, once and for all. The Hawza does not live in the past. There is a lazy assumption, common among Western observers, and regrettably among some Muslims themselves, that the Hawza is a fossil, a relic of the medieval world, a place where old men in turbans read old books and have nothing to say about modernity. This assumption is not merely wrong, it is actually the opposite of the truth. Let us remember where we are standing. The very concept of algebra, al-Jabr, was formalized by Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a scholar working in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, in the same intellectual ecosystem that the Imams were nurturing. His name gave the English language the word algorithm, the mathematical foundation upon which every computer, every search engine, every AI system on earth operates today. These are Arabic words, not because of racial pride, that is irrelevant, but because the scholars of the Islamic civilization did not see knowledge as divided into religious and secular categories. That division is a modern Western invention. It has no basis in the tradition of Ahlul Bayt. Jabir ibn Hayyan, who we're going to meet next session, God willing, was a student of Imam al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him. He was not merely a jurist or a narrator of the hadith. He was the father of early chemistry. He conducted experiments, wrote on pharmacology, developed laboratory techniques, and laid foundations that European scientists would build upon centuries later. And of course, I'm sure everyone has heard of the likes of Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and so many others. Jabir ibn Hayyan learnt under the same Imam who taught jurisprudence and theology. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, had said, "Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he has the greatest right to it." The reference is in the write-up. And he also said, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim." And he also said, "Seek knowledge even if it be in China." Meaning, even if it is far, if it's difficult, even if it requires you to leave everything you know, to come out of your comfort zone and to travel to the ends of the earth, knowledge is not optional. Knowledge is not limited to what is comfortable or familiar. Knowledge is an obligation, and it encompasses everything from the laws of prayer to the laws of thermodynamics to the laws of quantum physics, from the purification of the heart to the purification of water, from the science of hadith narrators, rijal, to the science of high artificial intelligence algorithms. The Hawza that produced Jabir ibn Hayyan, that existed in the same civilization as Khwarizmi, that today hosts scholars researching the jurisprudence of artificial intelligence. This is not an institution stuck in the past. It is an institution that has always been ahead of its time because it draws from a source that is beyond time altogether. But this leads to a question. What is knowledge? And yet this is the point we must return to again and again, because the age we live in will try to make us forget. Knowledge in the Islamic tradition is not merely information. The modern world worships data. It equates knowledge with the accumulation of facts, with degrees, with publications, with metrics, all of this. A man with a PhD is considered knowledgeable. A man with 1 million followers is considered an authority, an influencer even. The tradition of Ahlul Bayt says not necessarily. Knowledge in its truest sense is that which transforms the knower. It is that which builds the soul. It is that which draws the human being closer to his Lord. A man can memorize every hadith in al-Kafi and still be arrogant. And his memorization in that case is not knowledge, it is baggage. This is why Ayatollah Bahjat, may God rest his pure soul, one time he was asked by his students that give us some advice. And so he said that when you go and when you read a book of hadith or a book of anecdotes or something, you know, one of the Hawza books, don't just read it and just continue. Read one hadith, implement it, apply it, make it become part of you, then move to the next one. Moving on, a woman can master the intricacies of, for example, quantum physics. And if that mastery deepens her awe before the Creator, if it makes her more humble, more grateful, more aware of the infinite precision of the one who designed the atom, then her physics is an act of worship. Knowledge is light, but light is not merely illumination, it is warmth, it is life. It is the medium through which the soul recognizes its Creator and is drawn towards Him. This is what the Hawza at its very best cultivates. Not information, not credentials, not turbans and robes, but light. And this is the standard against which we must measure everything we study, everything we teach, and everything we claim to know. So this is the map. This is the story of human beings, flawed, brilliant, courageous, sometimes disagreeing with each other, sometimes persecuted by their own, always returning to the well of Ahlul Bayt for the pure, pure water. And at every step we will ask, What is the lesson for us here, now, in this age, in this place? Because we are not studying history. We're studying a blueprint for the civilization that the Imam, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return, will complete when he returns, but which we, the awaiters, are tasked with constructing in the meantime. Please give me a loud salawat and we move to the conclusion, the builders and the blueprint. So let's just gather the threads of what we've laid down tonight. Firstly, the Hawza is not merely a school. It is a divinely mandated institution, rooted in the Quran, commissioned by the Imams and sustained across 1,000 years by the sacrifice of scholars who chose knowledge over safety, teaching over silence, and when necessary, death over compromise. But it is even more than this. It is a living organism, animated not by curricula and syllabi, but by the spiritual radiance of teachers whose hearts are connected to God, nourished by the sacred geography of shrine cities where knowledge is in the air itself, and oriented towards a single uncompromising purpose, the production of human beings. Not scholars in the narrow sense, but souls who have confronted themselves and emerged purified, ready to serve the Imam of the age. Second, the Marja'iyyah is not merely a fatwa hotline. It is a comprehensive system of communal governance, judicial, financial, educational, spiritual, that the scholars built piece by piece to fill the void left by the Imam's occultation. It is the fruit of the Hawza and the mechanism by which the Imam's delegated authority reaches every believer on the earth. Its scope, as we will explore in the bridging sessions, extends far beyond ritual law into the full administration of community life, including the concept of the Hakim Shar' and the historical reality of enforcement of the Sharia within the territories of empires. Third, Wilayat al-Faqih is not an aberration, nor is it a modern invention. It is the culmination of a 1,000-year trajectory, the natural endpoint of a tradition that progressively expanded the scholar's role from narrator to theologian, to jurist, to community administrator, to finally head of state. We will trace this trajectory across every session, and we will address it fully, God willing, in a dedicated session or series rather to come, sub-series to come, beginning not with Imam Khomeini, but with Wilayat al-Faqih, with the Wilayah of God himself. And fourth, the Hawza does not live in the past. It has never lived in the past. From Jabir ibn Hayyan's chemistry under Imam al-Sadiq, to al-Khwarizmi's algebra, to today's research into the jurisprudence of artificial intelligence, and knowledge economy by scholars like Imam Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, and Ayatollah Mohsen Araki, the tradition has always engaged with the totality of human knowledge. Because in the worldview of Ahlul Bayt, there is no border between religious and secular knowledge. There is only knowledge that brings the human being closer to God and ignorance that leads him away. The words algebra and algorithm are Arabic, not by coincidence, but because the civilization that the Imam shaped did not truncate the intellect, it liberated it. Fifth and deepest of all, knowledge itself in this tradition is not information. It is light. Light that illuminates, that warms, that transforms. The Hawza does not exist to produce walking libraries or turbaned professors. It exists to produce human beings who have understood the meaning of man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabba. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord, and who have embarked on the terrifying, liberating, lifelong journey of stripping away the illusions of the ego so that the soul can see its creator. This is the standard. For the Hawza student, for the marja', for the believer who has never set foot in a seminary, the standard is the same. Become human. Everything else follows. And underlying all 5 threads is a single, unshakable principle. The Imam has not abandoned us. He told Shaykh al-Mufid in a letter that we will read in a future session, "We are not neglectful of your affairs, nor are we forgetful of your remembrance." The reference is in the write-up. He watches, he guides, and the scholars from Shaykh al-Kulaini in the 4th century Baghdad to the Ba'ath al-Kharij sessions in 21st century Qum are his instruments. The chain has never broken, not when the Seljuks burnt Baghdad, not when the Mongols drowned the Tigris in ink, not when the Ottomans beheaded the Shaheeds, not when Saddam executed the Sadrs, not when the American war machine, coupled with their Zionist lackey, took Imam Khamenei from us on the 28th of February 2026. The chain does not break because we are the school of Karbala. And in the school of Karbala, the fall of a leader is not the end of the mission. It is the deepening of it. We are about to meet the links of this chain, one by one, session by session, century by century. May God grant us the tawfiq to walk this path with open hearts, sharp minds, and purified souls. May He grant us the understanding to see in the story of these scholars not merely history, but a mirror, reflecting back to us the question, what are you building and what are you becoming? And may He count us, when the Imam appears, among those who did not merely wait, but who prepared. And now we have a very brief eulogy, but before that, can I have a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad?
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه.
Tonight's eulogy is brief, for it's an opening, and the eulogies that follow session by session will honor the individual builders, but tonight we honor them collectively. We honor every scholar who sat in a cold room in Baghdad, in Najaf, or Qum, or Hilla, or Jabal Amil, writing by candlelight, preserving the words of an Imam he would never meet in this world, trusting that the Imam saw him, trusting the ink on his page was a bridge to the return. We honor the mother who brought her son to a scholar's door, as the mother of Sayyid al-Murtada and Sayyid Radi brought her two boys to Shaykh al-Mufid, knowing that she was offering her most precious possessions to the service of Ahl al-Bayt. And here, a pause, because the Quran tells us a story about a mother and a vow, and it is that story, in many ways, that gave us the Hawza of Qum. The wife of Imran, Hanna, made a vow to God. In Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verse 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to us what she said. She said, "My Lord, I have vowed to you what is in my womb, consecrated for your service. So accept this from me. Indeed, you are the all-hearing, the all-knowing." She expected a son, a boy who would serve in the temple, who would be a priest, a scholar, a warrior for God. But when the child came, in the next verse, verse 36, she continues, and when she delivered, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, and when she delivered her, she said, "My Lord, I have delivered a female." There is a tone in her voice, a hint of an apology, as if a daughter could not fulfill this vow, as if the service of God were the exclusive domain of men. But God, glorified and exalted as He, accepted the gift. And in verse 37 of the same, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "So her Lord accepted her with a beautiful acceptance and caused her to grow in a beautiful manner." That girl became Sayyid Maryam, the blessed Saint Mary, the most honored woman in the Quran, the woman chosen above all the women of the worlds, the women to whom the angel spoke directly, the women through whom God manifested the miracle of Prophet Isa, Jesus, the son of Mary, peace be upon them, and may God hasten His return. God did not need Hannah's son. God wanted Hannah's daughter. And now look to the Hawza of Qum. It does not exist because of a great male scholar that decided to build it there. It exists because of a woman, Sayyedah Fatima Ma'suma, peace and blessings be upon her, the daughter of Imam al-Kadhim, the sister of Imam al-Rida, peace and blessings be upon them all. Because this woman was brought there by the decree of God. She was traveling, as we've said in the previous sessions, she was traveling to her brother, she was attacked, she fell ill, was injured, and was carried to Qum, where she passed away. She was buried there. And from her grave, from the resting place of the daughter of the Ahl al-Bayt, grew the most revolutionary center of Islamic learning in the modern world. Imam al-Rida, peace and blessings be upon him, gave her the title of al-Ma'suma, the infallible, and he said, "Whoever visits her recognizing her right, for him is paradise. The reference, of course, in the write-up. And her nephew, Imam Jawad, said, "Whoever visits my aunt in Qum, for him is paradise." Again, the reference is all in the write-up. The Hawza of Qum is built on the grave of a woman. The greatest center of philosophical innovation in the Shi'i world draws its spiritual gravity from a daughter. Let those who slander Islam as anti-woman reckon with this. Let the Islamophobes and the filthy Zionists and the Epstein class and the ignorant reckon with the fact that the most intellectually dynamic seminary in the Islamic world, the seminary that produced the Islamic Revolution, that trained Imam Khomeini and today hosts the most advanced research in Islamic philosophy, mysticism, metaphysics, jurisprudence, and more, exists because God accepted the sacrifice of a woman, just as he accepted the vow of Hannah, just as he chose Saint Mary above all the women of the world in the Quran. The tradition does not merely tolerate women, it is built upon them. Unless we forget the most fundamental proof of all, the one that stands at the very root of everything we are, everything we study, and everyone we follow. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, the seal of the prophets, the master of creation, had sons, Ibrahim, Qasim, etc. All of them died in infancy. And when they did, the pagans of Quraysh rejoiced. As Ibn Wa'il and others openly mocked him, calling him Abtar, a word that means someone who is cut off, without posterity, a man whose line ends with him. In the cruel calculus of pre-Islamic Arabia, where a man's worth was measured by his sons, a prophet without surviving male heirs was a prophet whose message would die with him. God's response was 3 verses, the shortest surah in Quran, perhaps the most devastating. Quran, Surah al-Kawthar, the chapter of abundance, 108th chapter of the Quran, verses 1 to 3. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Indeed, we have given you al-Kawthar, or abundance. So pray to your Lord and sacrifice. Indeed, it is your enemy who is the one cut off." Al-Kawthar, the abundance, the overflowing good. What is al-Kawthar? The exegetes, the Mufassirin, have offered many interpretations. Some say a river in paradise. Some say the intercession on the Day of Judgment. Some say the abundance of knowledge and followers. But in the Shi'i tradition, drawing from the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, the most profound interpretation is this. Al-Kawthar is Sayyedah Fatima al-Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. She is the abundance. She is God's answer to those who called his prophet cut off. Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi, may God protect him, in his exegesis of the surah, explains that the prophet's enemies assumed his mission would die because he had no surviving sons. They measured legacy by male lineage. But God overturned their entire framework. He did not give the prophet another son. He gave him something the pagans could never have imagined, a daughter, through whom the prophetic legacy would not merely survive, but would thrive and multiply beyond anything the world has ever seen. Your enemy is the one who is cut off, not you, O Muhammad. Where is Ibn al-Wa'il today? Where is Abu Lahab? Where are the Qurayshi chiefs who mocked? Their names only survive as footnotes in the biography of the man that they ridiculed. And the descendants of Sayyedah Fatima al-Zahra, they number in the millions. Every Imam, every Sayyid, every scholar whose black turban declares the prophetic bloodline, it flows through her. God did not continue the prophetic lineage through a son. He continued it through a daughter. Sayyedah Fatima al-Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. Every single Imam, from Imam al-Hassan to Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom, is her son, her grandson, her descendant. Every Sayyid who walks the earth today carries his nobility through her blood. Every turban wrapped in black cloth that signifies descent from the Prophet declares with every fold, I am here because of a woman. The entire tree of Ahlul Bayt, the tree whose fruit is the Imamah, the Marja'iyyah, the Hawza, the revolution, the future state of Imam al-Mahdi, grows from her, not from a son, but from a daughter. From Hannah's vow came Saint Mary. From Saint Mary came Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, may God hasten his return. From Sayyedah Fatima al-Zahra came every Imam. From the Imams came the Hawza. From Sayyedah Ma'suma's grave came Qum. From Qum came a revolution. We honor every mother, every daughter, every woman who carried the trust, often unseen, unsung, but always indispensable. We honor every student who left home and family to sit at the feet of a teacher, not for a degree or a salary, but for the privilege of carrying one more link in the chain, and for the hope that through the struggle of becoming human, he might catch a glimpse of the one who made him. We honor the martyred Imam Khamenei, who led the Ummah for 36 years, who watered this tree with his life, and whose blood is now part of the soil from which the next generation of builders will grow. And we honor his son and successor, who carries the trust forward from the Hawza to the helm, as the tradition has always demanded. Knowledge first, then leadership. Purification first, then governance. Become human first, then the guiding of humanity. Peace and blessings be upon them all, and may God protect them all. And peace be upon the one they served, the master of the age, the Imam of the time, the son of Al-Hasan, Muhammad al-Mahdi. May our souls be his ransom, and may God hasten his return. Now, if you can put your hands together for a very short supplication titled The Builder's Prayer. We close tonight with the words of the Imam himself from the Tawqi', delivered through the second deputy, the words that launched the entire architecture that we're about to study. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, O God, send your salutations and blessings upon Prophet Muhammad and the family of Prophet Muhammad. O God, you have commanded us to refer to the narrators of the traditions of your chosen ones. We have heard and we obey. Grant us, O Lord, the knowledge that transforms, not the knowledge that merely accumulates. Grant us the courage to know ourselves, truly, honestly, without the cosmetics of self-deception, so that through knowing ourselves, we may come to know you. Grant us the wisdom to see in the story of these scholars not merely a history lesson, but a mirror, and in that mirror the face of who we must become. Make us builders, O Lord, not spectators, not consumers, not critics standing on the sidelines, but builders of knowledge, of character, of institutions, of souls. And when your proof returns, when the cry is heard and the banner is raised, count us among those who prepared the ground upon which he will stand. O God, send your choicest blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, and upon his pure and infallible family, and upon his righteous companions, and hasten their relief. With the return of our Master, may our souls be his ransom. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.